What's up everyone, it's the Haitian Homie here with another Overwatch League video. So a couple weeks ago when I did my series about the power rankings, the preseason power rankings for Overwatch League Season 2, I didn't really have a lot of time to dig into exactly why I think each team will place where they will. I mean, when you're trying to fit, 10 teams into a 20-minute video, you barely get to talk about each team for a couple of minutes. So a lot of people had questions and comments about why certain teams were placed where they were. Either they agreed with me or they disagreed with me or they just had general questions. So like a lot of you guys had some awesome comments for me, and I decided to make a few videos with a little bit more information as to, why I chose each team to place where they will. So what this series is going to be is an in-depth kind of look at each team in the league. We're going to look at the Atlantic Division for the first 2 videos, 5 teams in each video, and then the Pacific Division for 2 videos, 5 teams in each video. So today, we're going to be looking at the Atlanta Reign, the Boston Uprising, the Florida Mayhem, the Houston Outlaws, and the London Spitfire. Without further ado, let's kick it off by digging into the Atlanta Reign and, exactly why I think they're going to be a bottom 5 team this year. So let's start off with the most obvious potential issue, which is the language barrier. This one's a tough one. It's a big variable because some teams deal with language barriers really well. You've got the Philadelphia Fusion, who have several different languages on their team, but manage to make the grand finals. And then you have teams like the Shanghai Dragons, where you only need, theoretically, 1 translator for Korean to Mandarin, and yet they couldn't pull that off. I think their translator left partway through the season, and they never bothered to get a replacement translator. And so on the Atlanta Reign, you've got Denmark, Korea, Russia, USA, Germany, Finland. Granted, most of these EU players should be able to speak English fairly well, but what happens when you need to translate like a very specific word, or there's some concept that's just not gelling right, and you really need that specificity? How long do you have to spend searching through Google trying to find an answer? Or how many translators do you have to have on the team if you just want to do it all in-house? It's a potential problem, but it's just something you have to think about as an outsider looking in, having no idea of actually how they're dealing with it. The second issue is this team does not have a lot of backup. There's only 8 players on this roster. One of them is on a 2-way contract, so you only have 7 full-time players. That is a huge red flag for me. Any team that only has 8 players is drawing a little bit of my concern, and here's why. So you have 2 support players, period. That's it. If one of them gets sick or has a family emergency and has to leave the league for an extended period of time, then you're subbing in one of your DPS as a support player. Now you have no backup DPS because you only have 3 DPS. And if Gator on that 2-way contract doesn't come up and play in the league full time, then you also don't have any backup tanks. This is a huge problem because if even one person goes down, you're strapped. You're at the bare minimum. You've got nothing to work with. And again, that's assuming that Gator doesn't play much. I personally think they'll pull him up after this contender season is over and just have him play full time with the Reign. But if they don't, if they want to use him conservatively and you're forced to pull him up, then you leave your academy team at a disadvantage because you've just pulled him up out of the blue. This is not a good situation overall for the Reign, especially when you could sign another, 4 players to this team? Maybe they'll be signing more throughout the year, but right now I'm a little worried that they only have 8. So let's dig into the team specifically. Let's take a look at these players. First of all, you've got Dako and Pukpo from Element Mystic. I think this is probably the most important aspect to the team, is that at least there's some synergy on the tank line. I'm assuming Dako and Pukpo are going to be starting, and Gator will be the backup because of that synergy, but it can only take you so far, especially considering that in Season 1 of Contenders Korea, Element Mystic was kicked out in the quarterfinals, and then Season 2, they were kicked out in the semis to Team Runaway. Team Runaway ended up getting signed completely into the league. So when you do the process of transitive powers, right? Element Mystic is worse than Runaway. Runaway was a tier 2 team, so it was probably worse than some of the Overwatch League teams. So you're at the bottom of this hierarchy, and that's the tank line that you're building your team around. It's possible that with the rest of the Reign players, they'll be able to shine. They'll be able to pull off some magic. but they're not proven yet because they haven't had great success in contenders. You look at their support line, and it's the same story here. You look at Kodak, and yeah, he's played on some contenders teams, but they finished bottom of the leaderboard in Season 1 of Contenders Europe, middle of the pack Season 2, and then he played on Team Germany, which is an accomplishment, but Team Germany got bodied in the Paris qualifiers of the Overwatch World Cup this year. So they came last place in their stage. That's not a good look. You move over to Massa, and he's one of the only 2 players on this team that have success in the Tier 2 scene. He played with Team Giganti and came 2nd place in Contenders Europe Season 1, semifinals in Season 2. Not bad. Finally, we look at the DPS line. And here's where things get a little bit iffy, especially if you're the management. Because, I mean, hey, if you only have 2 support players, it's pretty clear who's going to be starting, right? If you've only got 2 full-time tank players, you know who's going to start. When you look at the DPS, Erster has to start. Korean player that played with Lucky Future Zenith in Overwatch Contenders China. Won both seasons of Contenders. He's a starter, period. But now you have to choose between Enlayer or Defran for the 2nd spot. And here's where the business kind of comes in. You look at Enlayer, and his team did poorly in Contenders North America Season 1. Middle of the pack Season 2. But at least he's got some experience playing in the T2 scene. Defran technically does, but he also quit. And while he is a popular name, you don't know if he's going to stick around. I mean, he has that history of giving up on things and quitting and going back to whatever it is he wants to do in the moment. So if you start Defran and then his ego blows up or he declines, then now you're subbing in someone else. You don't want to have to mix things up if you don't have to. So do you start Enlayer? And if you start Enlayer, why sign such a big personality in Defran if he's going to sit on the bench? And if they rotate, well, I could see them rotating. Personally, I think that's the best option, is to just rotate them back and forth, but then you have to really synergize and figure out who's going to work in which situations, and you have to have a good game plan for that before the season starts. All in all, they're putting pieces together of players that I think are kind of underdogs. Players who weren't particularly successful in the Tier 2 scene, but with the right puzzle pieces, maybe they can do better in Overwatch League with different teammates. But this is a lot of ifs, right? This is if you don't have any problems with your support players because you only have 2. This is if your tank line can communicate with your back line. If Defran stays in a good state all season. I mean, there's so many variables here that's why I put them in the bottom part of the league, because it's just too many variables for me to say that they'll be any higher. Next, we're going to take a look at the Boston Uprising. So the first thing to note with the Boston Uprising is the players who left. Neko left to join the Toronto Defiant. Mistakes retired completely from Overwatch. Striker moved over to the San Francisco Shock. So these are big name players. I thought Striker was a huge loss for them. That was, in my view, a big mistake. So you look at their losses, and their losses are notable. I mean, you can't just say, we didn't need him, because I think you did. At the very least, Striker. Okay, so you picked up 5 more Tier 2 players. We'll talk about each one of them in a minute, but before we get into the player breakdowns, they're running 9 players. It's better than 8, but you're still in a situation where you don't have a ton of backup. Granted, you have 4 tanks, if you count fusions that's on that 2-way. Then you've got 3 supports, but only 2 DPS. So worst case scenario, you've got to move over one of your tank players, I guess, or maybe one of your support to play DPS. It's not the end of the world, but again, you had Striker. You didn't need to be in this situation. Then there are the coaches and management. I'm sure most of you guys know the way that Huck dealt with that team last year. A lot of players had some strong feelings about Huck. They wanted to be traded. I believe Striker was one of those who wanted to be traded, so they did let him go. I guess maybe that's why they let him go, was because you didn't want to have someone with a poor frame of mind. He didn't want to be on the team, so they had to let him go. You shouldn't, again, your management shouldn't have put your team in that situation anyway, where one of your star players demanded to be traded. So I have my worries about the team as long as Huck is at the helm. Granted, you have Gunba coming over from the Los Angeles Valiant. I hope Gunba will be able to bring something new to the team and bring some stability for those players that they couldn't get from Huck. But again, I'm keeping my expectations low just in case things fall apart again, especially considering they probably don't have the greatest team morale right now, with most of the team being traded or leaving. Yikes. So let's dig into the actual players themselves. You've got Note and Gamsu remaining on the tank line. I think that's fine. You've added a couple of extra tanks, but I'm not sure how much they'll be starting. I would assume you keep your starting tank line the same, just because, again, they have synergy, they've worked together, they have experience in the league, and then maybe as Axiom and Fusions get used to what's going on up here in Overwatch League, then maybe they start taking the strain off of these other two guys. Then you've still got Kelix and Aim God on support from last season. I don't think this is the strongest support line. There were some instances where I didn't think Kelix was all that great last season. Again, maybe that's just a personal opinion and I'm off base, but I'm not sure he's the answer. Maybe Alamau comes in and takes that spot. I'd be okay with that, but we'll see. So then we move into the new players. Let's talk about them role by role, starting with the DPS. You've got Blase and Color Hex. I want to talk about Color Hex first. Great player from the Sydney Drop Bears. If I'm not mistaken, he and Custa are now the only two Australian players in the Overwatch League. Considering how dominant the Drop Bears have been in Contenders Australia, they came second place Season 1, first place Season 2, playoffs so far when I'm recording this in Season 3, I'm surprised more of them haven't been signed yet. But Color Hex, I think that's a great pickup for the Uprising. Blase has experience with the Gladiators Legion, middle of the pack team for Season 1 and Season 2. Not the most impressive. You know, maybe he could be helpful. You're going to need all the help you can get now that you've let go of a lot of your DPS players. We look at the extra tanks, Axiom and Fusions. Again, I want to talk about Fusions first. I love an underdog. When the UK came in and shook up some of the top teams in the World Cup, I saw Fusions was at the center of that. His Rhine play was fantastic, especially in a time when it was really oppressive to be a Rhine player. He had a tough task and he was phenomenal. You know, they went all the way to the semifinals in the World Cup. His contenders team, the British Hurricane, came first in European Contenders Season 1. Didn't do so hot in Season 2. But after seeing him in action in the World Cup, I think he's totally deserved this spot on the Uprising. Unfortunately, he's on a two-way contract, so maybe we won't see a ton of him, at least right off the bat, but I'm excited to see if he comes in later on in the season. Then there's Axiom, who came from Toronto Esports. They came second place in Contenders North America Season 1, and then they came in the quarterfinals in Season 2. Both times they lost to the undefeated, unbeaten Fusion University. Like, you're just not gonna win against them. No one ever has. So, you know, if they played literally anyone else in those quarterfinals, especially because they took Fusion to 3 maps, they probably would have done better Season 2. In any case, I think this is a fairly solid pickup. Maybe, again, taking some of the stress off of the two tank players that they do have starting. And finally, you have Alamau, one of the only South American Contenders players to get signed, maybe the only one, now that I think about it. Came from Brazil Gaming House, the most dominant team in Contenders South America. First place Season 1, first place Season 2. He ended up playing on the Brazilian World Cup team. They didn't qualify out of the group stages, but the guy is fantastic. I can't wait to see him play. I hope we get to see some wild Lucio. So hopefully he subs in a little bit for Kelix or Aim God. I'd love to see him in action. And I'm glad that they're taking a chance signing players from the lesser known Contenders divisions. I mean, they've got Australian and South American contenders here. They went on a limb, and I applaud them for that. I hope it works out for them, but honestly, their DPS line is in a touchy spot. You only have 2 dedicated DPS. Your general manager, Huck, didn't prove himself last season and caused a lot of problems for the team, so I'm a little bit concerned that history might repeat itself and the team kind of crumbles. I hope the new additions, both in players and in coaches, help the team with some stability, but I'm still not sold, and that's why I've placed them near the bottom of the Overwatch League standings this year. Now we move over to the Florida Mayhem, and boy oh boy, they had some changes. So they've only kept 3 players from Season 1, which is going to be Awesome Guy, Saya Player, and Tavik. They dropped Logix, Manitin, Swoosh, Zebasai, Zupe, and Zappis, and they've picked up mostly Korean players. So they switched from being a EU team to being a Korean team, just like that. Tavik is the only European guy left on this squad. So congratulations, Tavik, you made it. But let's take a look at where this team lies. Again, 9 players, one of them on a 2-way contract, so they're in a similar position to the Boston Uprising. Right now they've got 2 support players, 3 tanks, 4 DPS. If I had to guess, it's going to be Apply on the bench and Tavik on the bench, just because Tavik is the only guy here who doesn't speak Korean, so it would make sense that he'd be sitting. And Apply is on a 2-way contract, again, doesn't speak Korean. I honestly am not sure why Tavik is even still on the team, given that the rest of the team that's on full contracts are Korean. Anyway, let's move forward. I'm just not sold on whether or not they've actually gotten much better. And the reason for that is, yeah, they had Awesome Guy and Saya Player come in partway through last season, and they did okay. But Saya Player is primarily a sniper. He does a lot of Widowmaker and snipe type of characters, hit scan. That'll depend on the meta. Right now that's not meta. I think it's changing, but right now it's not meta, so I'm concerned. And even when it was meta, he was getting bodied sometimes. He wasn't consistent enough to really carry the team toward victory, and that's when you're playing these hit scan sniper kind of characters, you have to be able to get quick picks to secure a quick 6v5 in a fight. You look at Tavik, again, like I said, I'm not sure how much he'll even be playing, so we can kind of skip him. And then you've got Awesome Guy on tank. Again, he just wasn't super convincing last year, and maybe that was because they were still running a part European, part Korean roster, so maybe being able to communicate better with other Korean players, he'll be better off. But let's take a look at the new pickups. First off is Apply. Apply played with the Mayhem Academy team in Contenders for all 3 seasons, in which Mayhem Academy was lackluster. Middle of the pack Season 1, middle of the pack Season 2, even lower than that Season 3. The Academy team, this is a problem for Mayhem because their Academy team isn't that great. So who are you going to pull up from there to make your Overwatch League team better? I mean, they've pulled up a couple of different guys from Mayhem Academy, and it's like, okay, if you couldn't lead them to success there, why have they been pulled up to the big leagues? In any case, Apply, he's on that 2-way contract, so I don't think he'll be seeing a ton of play time, so I'm not sure it really matters, but I don't honestly see why he's on this team. Then you have BQB. I would say this is the sole best pickup that they've had this year. X6 Gaming did really well in Contenders Korea Season 1. They won it, of course. Currently, a lot of those guys now play for the Hangzhou Spark. BQB got picked up by the Mayhem, so that's awesome. Hopefully he'll get to see some playing time, and I honestly do think he will. Then you look at your support, and you've got Chris and Hagopun. Chris is a South Korean player from Meta Athena in Overwatch Contenders. Again, Season 1 in Korean Contenders, they came near bottom of the leaderboard. Season 2, same thing. Hagopun, on the other hand, he started Overwatch League Season 1 with the London Spitfire as a bench player, ended up getting put on the Mayhem Academy team, and has now been pulled back up into Overwatch League. So I guess it's cool to see a familiar face again, but I mean, he wasn't a starter in Season 1. Does he deserve to be a starter here? We'll find out. Zephyr is in a similar situation as their flex player. Zephyr was pulled from the Seoul Dynasty during the offseason, where he was again, kind of a bench player sub. And finally, you've got Swan, a tank player coming over from NRG Esports. Again, they middle of the pack in Season 1 Contenders NA, semifinals in Season 2. But again, so here's the thing. If I'm being honest about the Mayhem, when I look at rosters, right, and I look at players who are from the Tier 2 scene, or I look at players who weren't starting on other rosters, Sometimes I say, you know what, they were underrated, it's their time to shine. But I look at a lot of the Florida Mayhem's players and I can't say, you know what, that guy was underrated. He deserved to be pulled up and given a shot. Honestly, I look at the roster and instead I say, why are these guys here? Why does this team exist? It's a really lackluster roster. It's not super impressive. A lot of the more impressive signings from these tier 2 teams ended up going to other Overwatch League teams, and it's almost like the Mayhem were left to pick up the scraps, or decided to pick up the scraps. And it's not even underdoggy in a way like the Boston Uprising are. It's just bad. Maybe BQB will do some work. Maybe their existing players from Season 1 will lead the new guys to victory, but I'm just not sold on it. This is a very lackluster roster, and I don't think they're going to do so hot in Season 2. So fourth, we have the Houston Outlaws. This one's going to go fast just because there's not a whole lot to talk about here. So the Outlaws in the offseason did get rid of a few players, or they moved them around a bit. So they released Fact Fiction, which I think is fine. He wasn't doing anything for the team. Clockwork moved over to a coaching, non-playing role, and Mendo is now a content creator or streamer. So I think that's cool that they kept Clockwork and Mendo because the fans liked them. They were good personalities, and it's a class act. It really is a class act that they decided to keep them around in some form. Other than that, they've kept the team almost identical. Linkser, Jake, Coolmat, Spree, Muma, Boink, Bonnie, Raucus, and Arhan all return from Season 1. The only addition so far is that they've picked up Dante from the Shock. I think that's a good pickup, especially if Sombra comes back into the meta. Then you have some opportunities to do some cool Sombra stuff with Dante Jake or Dante Linkser, however they decide to work that out. I like the pickup. If you're the Shock, maybe you think that swapping Dante out and picking up every other DPS player in the league is a good, is a good strategy, and maybe it is. But I think Dante will be good for the Outlaws. But I didn't think their DPS was the problem to begin with, and that's why I am a little bit concerned for them in Season 2. I thought that the tanks and support lines needed more work than the DPS, but neither of those have been touched since Season 1. They've gotten rid of some guys, but they haven't added new tanks or support players. Oftentimes, Raucus, Bonnie, and Boink would get caught out in situations on support where they didn't need to be. They'd be unnecessary deaths, they'd slow their team down, and I was always wondering, okay, when are things going to change? And then they didn't. And then you look at the tank line, and Muma was always really going to be the starter, but who was going to back up Muma? Was it going to be Coolmat, or was it going to be Fact Fiction? And you never really knew, right? And neither one of those worked out super well for them, so it's like, okay, you need to work on your tank line, and they haven't. So the thing with the Outlaws is they thinned out the roster a little bit. They've still got 10. They added Dante, which I think is a good addition, but they didn't improve their tank line or their support line at all, and that's a problem to me. Tanks were a consistent problem throughout the league in Season 1, and a lot of the teams are fixing that. But since Houston isn't, that puts them at a little bit of a disadvantage. I still think they're going to be better than a majority of these expansion teams coming in, and they'll be okay, but ultimately I see them finishing about where they did the first season because their team looks about the same as it did the first season, and they definitely needed to make some improvements that they didn't. And finally, we talk about the London Spitfire. Right now, they have 8 players. They've got Birdring, Prophet, Fury, Gesture, Bedosin, and Nuss coming back. Awesome lineup. I mean, they won the grand finals. They won Season 1 with this team. I think they still look good. That's a good starting 6. They did let go of a few players that I'm not sure why they didn't still have them in the back pocket. I mean, they let go of Hureg, Wuyao, Hagopun, Tizzy, and Closer. That's 5 players. Especially because you're only running 8 right now. I don't understand the business behind it. I don't know what kind of salary caps they're dealing with or what the case may be, but you let go of players and didn't really add enough replacements. I can see situations where you consider it quote, trimming the fat, right? Where you get rid of players that you weren't going to use anyway. So I understand why Tizzy was let go of because they never really played Tizzy. But did they really have to get rid of everybody? I mean, that wasn't the starting 6? I don't know. You have extra open spots on the roster. I just wonder why they're not filled. So that is a little worrisome, but I mean, when you have the type of talent in like Birdring and Prophet and Fury, yeah, maybe you don't really need backups. And the 2 backups you do have on DPS and support, Guard and Krillin, respectively, I think you're going to be okay. I do worry about their tank line a little bit, just because you don't have a backup on the tank line. But even if they have to do something crazy and sub in a support for a tank, I think the rest of the team is amazing enough that they're not going to have as much of a problem as, say, the Reign needing to sub in someone for a tank. If any team can pull off something wonky, it might be the London Spitfire. You know, the team that slumped halfway through the season and still managed to win it all. I can't put anything past these guys. So let's talk a second about the 2 new pickups. Guard is a DPS player from Element Mystic. As you may remember, the Element Mystic tanks went over to the Atlanta Reign, and I think if there's a bright spot there, it's going to be them. I can't say the same about Guard, just because, well, the bright spots are obviously your starting DPS and, like, you know, Prophet. So I don't know how much playtime he's going to get, but he's good to have in the back pocket. I don't think he's a downgrade, but I also don't think he's a huge upgrade. It's like, it's an even trade, getting rid of guys like Hureg and picking up Guard instead. Then you've got a new support player in Krillin. I'll be honest, I've never heard of this guy or his teams that he played on until I recorded this video. This is the most surprising pickup for me. They must really see something in him, because he played Open Division Season 1, did okay, got a Trials spot for Contenders Season 1, and then ended up back in Open Division Season 2. Not 100% sure what he's doing here, because he's not played in the Tier 2 scene. They must have some wild idea for this guy. I don't know. And a lot of times, you know, especially when I looked at the Mayhem, I looked and said, okay, why are these guys on a spot? That's when you're making an entire team out of unknowns. But when you're adding one dude to a pretty solid roster who's a unknown, I'm willing to give the Spitfire the benefit of the doubt here to say, okay, they must really have a plan for him. So I'm excited and nervous to see what the deal is here with Krillin. But overall, when you break this team down, the starting 6 are just so good. I mean, they're just so good that I can't keep them out of the top 5. And even though you've thinned the roster a lot, the fact that you're so reliable with your starting 6 means that you don't need much of backup. And that's what they had a problem with in Season 1, was they had so many players that they just ended up not needing. They figured out what worked and they rolled with it. Is it cocky to assume that you can just do that for a second year and not get figured out? Maybe. Is it a potential problem that you don't have a backup tank? Yes, it's absolutely a problem. But I'm more likely to think that the stars would align and things go well for this team than I would for the Atlanta Reign, who are in a similar position as far as roster numbers are concerned. If I'm going to give anyone the benefit of the doubt, it's the London Spitfire. So I know this one was a little bit of a longer video, but I hope breaking down these teams a little bit more, showing you where their players came from, showing you some of their results in the Tier 2 scene. Hopefully that helped a little bit. I know it's helped me. I'm learning through this as well because, of course, I can't watch all the Contenders scenes. I can't keep up on all the games. So I'm brushing up on my players just as much as maybe some of you guys are. And let me know what I can do in the future videos for the series, because there will be 3 more, to make the series even better. Let me know what I should improve on, and let me know in the comments what you think about some of these guys. Again, maybe I'm still underestimating some of them or overestimating some of them. So thank you all for watching. Subscribe if you would like, and until next time, this is the Haitian Homie signing off, and I'll see you guys in the next video.